Everybody get all set up here? I don't want to interrupt y'all's. I feel like I'm interrupting y'all's lunch. But we want to go ahead and get started with our time today. I want to kind of kick off just with a quick show of hands. Is there anybody that's your first time to one of these quarterly lunch and learns? Awesome. 3, 4, 5. Cool. That's so encouraging to me. So thank you guys for being here. Those of you that are, those of you that are back. It's so cool to see what God's doing here. So I want to kick off with a little story. A couple years ago, when my speaking career was in its infancy, and there's a lot that would argue that it's still in its infancy, but I had a buddy of mine, his name's Dave Rendell, and Dave asked me to cover for him. You know, it's the phone call where he's like, hey man, can you cover for me? I'm like, all right, what are we talking about? You know, and I had previously done mostly like nonprofits and some kind of conferences, maybe a Rotary Club here or there, but never really the corporate environment. And Dave was a corporate speaker. He's like, there's this bank that wants you to come speak. And I'm like, okay, cool. He's like, well, it's a small bank, and it's actually outside of Raleigh, and it's next Wednesday night, and it's absolutely free. I said, so let me check this off, all right? So we're driving 2 hours on a Wednesday night for free to speak to this bank. He said, that's it. I was like, cool, I'm in. And I went and I gave that talk. And the reason why I share that story is because at YouPrint, we believe that generosity always wins. Like always, always, always. Generosity always wins. And we're here today because of that same kind of principle. Now, to create some context for those of you that are new, YouPrint is our organization. My business partner, Kevin Adams, a Zondervan published author. He's been with us before. He was here at the first event. He was here at the last event. He had a conflict today. But we created this organization with this heart of generosity to help people kind of awaken their why, begin to thrive in their gifts, and live a life of impact. And our marker is a thumbprint. Because I've said this in previous, everybody take a look, everybody has a thumbprint. But the cool thing is they're all different. And we live in a culture where, especially from a standpoint of faith, everybody says, well, it has to look the same. You got to go dig a well in Africa. If you're really a person of faith, then you got to hold a baby sometime, you know what I mean? And get your photo taken or whatever, put it on social media. But that's just not what it looks like. And so what we set out to do is to highlight people in this community who are living kind of atypical lives of faith, right? These aren't the pastors in the pulpits. These are the folks that are living out in the everyday. And I think if you look back at who we've had with us, it's been super cool. So it's kind of a recap on this. We first heard from Kevin Adams, who's my business partner, who wrote a book called The Extravagant Fool. And it's about waking up his faith. And it's a powerful story about letting faith become the chief navigator. And in that event, the big takeaway that I encourage everybody to consider is close your eyes, go to your own funeral, and imagine somebody standing on stage and saying they lived an effective life. And is that the goal? Or would you want to be remembered as someone who lived a faithful life? And so we kind of said faith is the thing that's going to sustain your generosity, that's going to sustain your philanthropy, your engagement in the community, that's going to give you hope when it seems hopeless, right? And that was kind of the first event. The second event, we heard from Jimmy Mahan and his incredible story of taking action on what God did in his life to kind of leave the bank and to go up to the mountains. And now Jimmy, was it Camp Seagull? Is that, now he's the director at Camp Seagull. And just continue to see Jimmy step into this thing that he feels like God's calling him to do. So the idea there was faith is active. It's not sitting in a chair waiting on fish to multiply. The little boy had to bring his lunch. And then the fish was multiplied, right? It takes action on our behalf to step into faith. And then the last event we talked about faith being courageous. That faith is courageous. And I argued, I said, there are not enough brave people in the world. We live in a culture, unfortunately, where it seems like most people are just willing to go downstream and kind of do the shuffle, right? And it's just, hey man, if I can get to retirement, then we'll be good. Or if I can get to this 6-figure or that, I'll be good. But we have to turn and say, no, I got to be brave and courageous to do what it is that I feel like God's calling me to do. And so we've been trying to give you guys some different perspectives on faith as the conduit by which your life can be navigated. And so it's cool to see you guys coming back. Now, I have to tell you this. I've got a pastor friend of mine who's very curious about these meetings. He runs a much bigger church, but he says, well, what's going on over there at the bank? And what did Live Oak bring you in to do? That's kind of what he said. And I said, well, I'm a hold-up partner. Live Oak didn't bring me in. They offered the room and the opportunity, but this is what God is doing. God's doing this in this city. And you got to step outside the context to see that God is doing something in this city. How many people here are not from Wilmington? That's like 80%. 80% of the people are in this room with an organization that has the people and the firepower and the heart to change this city. That's cool. And so what we want to do is say, how can we strengthen that? How can we support that? So when YouPrint came on board, it was with this idea to say, hey, let's talk about faith. Let's have conversations that invite people to consider this, and then let's go out and make a difference. Not just throw dollars at stuff, but actually give of ourselves, our time, our resources, our energy. So as a little bit of a recap, that's kind of what we're up to. That's why we're having these meetings. Now, I told you the story about speaking for my buddy Dave, because something cool happened about a month later. A month later, I get a call from Dave. He's like, hey, Matt, I need you to cover for me. And I'm like, all right, what are we talking about here? Free event, 2 hours out of town on a Wednesday night, you know? And he was like, no, man. There's a mortgage company in Texas that's hired me to come speak to their executive team in Boston. And I have a conflict that's come up. I can't go. Will you cover for me? And I was like, whoa. Well, what are the details? And he told me, and it was the single greatest speaking fee, I guess you would call it, that I had ever received to that date, right? It was the largest fee I had ever received. I had this opportunity to present before this board of directors for a mortgage company, and I was like, holy cow, this happened. This was made possible by a willingness just to be generous and help a buddy out on a Wednesday night 2 hours up the road. And I went to that event, and I did something that was really, really cool. I had the first opportunity. Y'all imagine, like, you ever been in that situation where you're just completely overwhelmed? You know what I mean? It's like, I'm not cut out. Anybody have kids? Like, remember when you brought the baby home? You know, I don't know if y'all have been there yet. I don't know what, but you're like, I'm not cut out for this, right? You're so overwhelmed. As a dad to 4, it's like, that's how I feel every day. I go home, and I'm like, I'm not cut out for this. This is crazy. But that's how I felt when I was speaking to this group. You got the CEO sitting right here. You got 24 executives around. And you got this guy who's been paid to come and give them advice. And I was like, man, this is just, I'm completely overwhelmed. And I stood up and I was like, God, on a plane flight, I was like, give me some wisdom, some insight on what I'm supposed to say here, because I am completely out of my league, right? And he's like, say what I've put on your heart. The message doesn't change because of who you're in front of. And so I sat there and I was like, all right, guys, a lot of speakers come into a room with an idea or a best-selling book or something they're going to teach you. I want to do something completely different today. I want to ask you guys, what are you struggling with? You know, a corporation cannot grow beyond its unwillingness to be honest. Let me say that again. A corporation or an individual cannot grow beyond their dishonesty. If you don't admit the things you're struggling with, if you don't get real about what you're actually facing, you can't grow beyond it. Everybody with me on that? I said this to a board of directors, and I was like, so what are you struggling with? Like I have any insight in the mortgage business, right? But that's the message, right? Is where are you struggling? Let's get honest about it. All of a sudden, the CEO speaks up. He's like, hey, man, we got a problem with delivery time on loans, you know? And I was like, okay, all right, what else? He's like, we got a problem with this. We got a problem with that. And I said, okay, cool. Here's what we're going to do. Let's frame this around a few concepts. And I gave him a plan, and everybody walked away, and the CEO was like, man, that was cool. That was very different. You know, I didn't come in and say, you know, how to speed up your mortgage closing process by X% by this process. No, I said you got to treat people better. You got to start being honest with people. Do they just call the underwriters when they need something, or they just call the underwriters to say, hey, how you doing? You having a good day? So you'd be amazed at what treating people well will do to make a business more effective and efficient, because people want to be appreciated. And he's like, wow, I know that, but like, I never really thought of that before. And so what happened because of that, I wrote an article called 3 Simple Reminders to Simplify Your Business. And the article ended up getting published by Success Magazine. Now, I don't say that to put that on the wall, right? I say that because you got to go back to the Wednesday night in a 2-hour car ride to a bank to speak for free. Okay? Now, when I was thinking about what we were going to talk about today and our guest, I said, okay, I want to talk about this idea of honesty. I think that honesty is kind of the theme of today. Because unless you're willing to get honest, you'll never grow beyond where you are. Corporately, individually, from a faith perspective, with your physical fitness, honesty is an essential for you to be able to grow beyond where you are. But nobody likes to be honest, right? We don't like to be honest. I'm not talking about like blatant lies, right? Like my kid's got like green marker on his fingers. Like, son, did you put the green marker on the wall? He's like, no. I'm like, I see your fingers. You're lying to me, right? Like, that's a blatant lie. It's kind of the subtle dishonesties that I think we struggle with so often. Like getting real about what our motives are. Like getting real about whose kingdom we're building here. And that's one of the things that I started to step back and look at my own life. And just to share a bit of context for you, a couple years ago when I was writing my book, I wasn't really honest with what my motives were. I saw these best-selling authors and these experts in the field, and so you kind of like pander to these guys, and you're like, oh, they got a blue check on their name in Twitter. Like, they must know what's going on, you know what I mean? Like, I need to pay attention to them. Maybe I could be friends with them, you know? And you start to kind of say, man, maybe this thing that's driving this is more of my desire to be known than of just making a difference in one person's life. And then it kind of became this faith message, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, maybe I could get involved with this church. And maybe I could leverage those relationships to kind of use that as a way to help promote this message thing that I want to do. And I had to go through this process of purification in my own life. And I'll be honest, it's really, really, really hard. It's hard to get real with yourself about what you're struggling with. It's hard to get real about the motives that are driving you. But unless you do that, you'll never grow beyond it. So one of the thoughts that I want to give you guys today, a little nugget, you know, if we were tweeting, this is what we would tweet, right? Is that honesty brings clarity. Honesty brings clarity. When you get honest with yourself, it's the only way that you can see clearly. You know, we live in a culture where it's a lot easier to look at everybody else and point a finger rather than to stare in the mirror. And not from a vain perspective, but just to be real. And say, what am I bringing to the table? How can I help make this situation better? Instead of blaming the government or blaming the president or blaming your spouse or blaming, you know, whatever, taking responsibility and getting honest is always a first step to growth. And so honesty is kind of one of these key things that I really want us to focus on, because in my own life, you know what it took? I had to get real, and I had to have somebody walk alongside me. You know, YouPrint, our corporation, was birthed out of what Kevin and I actually started doing. Kevin, who's older than I am, who's wiser than I am, who's more read than I am, started mentoring me through my journey of wanting to chase my passion and my heart of speaking and writing. And we said, oh my gosh, something's happening here. Like, I'm actually growing. It's hard, but I'm growing. I'm getting prepared for what God's called me to do because I'm willing to be honest. And so Kevin helped me break off some of these strongholds. And you know, whether we don't want to talk about it or not, but there's so many things that sometimes keep us, you know, restricted. There's strongholds that we walk through life with. Maybe it's the fact that our dad never said good job. Maybe it's the fact that we never were kind of the popular one in class. Or maybe it's the fact that, you know, we always wanted to reach a certain level or status and we're not quite there. Whatever it is, and we have these things, these narratives that dictate our life and our everyday action. Until we're honest about them, we'll never grow beyond them. You know, and so that's really the encouragement today, is to get honest and say that faith is honest. Here's the takeaway, though. You cannot lead unless you know who you are. You cannot lead unless you know who you really are. You know, leadership in our culture has become more about titles. Oh, they're a leader because they're, says it on their door, manager, director, you know, executive, whatever. Guys, leadership is about courage. It's about honesty and courage. Those who lead are willing to be honest because they know themselves, and they're willing to be courageous to step into that. It's the only way you can lead. We were talking about this on the radio the other day. Kevin and I brought it up from Braveheart. You know, Braveheart's a movie, what Mel Gibson, William Wallace. I just got back from Scotland, so it's kind of like fresh in my mind. William Wallace looks at Robert the Bruce and he says, men don't follow titles. They follow courage. And I just want to challenge you guys today to think about that in your own life. To get honest, to know who you are as a way to catapult your leadership and your courage to really step in here at the bank, but also in this community to make a difference. And again, with what the bank's done this year, it's just awesome to see. It is happening, guys. It's so cool. It is happening, and it's awesome. But it can't die by the wayside because we get frustrated or we get tired. We have to keep pressing into this idea and then watch what God will do if we're but faithful. And so I want to kind of close with this thought. You know, as we look back, we've been here a year now. This is our fourth event, our fourth engagement. You guys are still coming, so, you know, we'll keep doing it, you know, as long as you guys are here and you feel like it's adding value. But I've been thinking a lot about, hey, what do we want to look for in 2018? What do we want to do next year, right? And for me, it moves into this conversation. When you are honest, it breeds clarity, and you uncover who you really are. And at the root of that is this idea of identity and leadership. And so next year, we want to really focus our interest in these conversations on identity, discovering who you are, your gift set, and then applying that to lead here at the bank and in the city. So this year was about waking up the giants inside, waking up this idea of faith, you know. That's our radio show, Wake Up Our Faith, you know. It's all tied together. This is waking it up. Say, hey guys, let's wake up. God's doing something. Let's get involved. And then next year, stepping into who we are and leading in the city. And so I want to kind of challenge you guys with that and just leave you with that as we think about it today. And we have a story. Our guest today, I'm so excited to bring Greg up here in a second. Just a little bit of context. How Greg is actually here is nothing short of miraculous, right? I mean, you know, Greg, again, not from here, right? You know, but he is here because God has brought him here. And I happened to cross paths with Greg a couple years ago. He actually did my melanoma surgery, but then, you know, kind of parted ways. And all of a sudden, Kevin, my business partner, is in his front yard one day, and Kevin's neighbor's like, hey, you need to get to know this Greg Viehman guy. And so completely random connection there. So we sit down with Greg and have coffee and then kind of again go our separate ways. And Greg's running his business. And then all of a sudden, you know, we had a date change and all of a sudden we have an opportunity and bam, Greg Viehman was a name that we kind of brought to us. And so we feel very, very confident that this is what God's done to have Greg here because his testimony is so powerful. And so it's really cool to see that. So a little bit of a backstory on Greg. Greg is a surgeon. He's a doctor at Seacoast Skin Surgery here in Wilmington, Howell Creek Landing, off of Military Cutoff. But Greg is a super, super smart dude, graduated first in his class, but has an incredible story that's highlighted in his book, The God Diagnosis. He had a follow-up book, which is a study called The Abundant Life. And Greg's going to share a little bit of his testimony with us today. Graciously and generously, again, the theme here, he brought a copy of this for everyone who's here today. And we're excited to hear from Greg. But I want you to pay attention to this concept of how this honesty ties into what we're doing and how it's going to propel us forward. So, Greg, you want to come on up, brother? We're excited to chat. Guys, give him a hand. Get comfy. This is like the Oprah couch, right? Be like Ellen. So, Greg, man, tell everybody here a little bit. Give them a little bit of backstory on yourself.
I grew up in actually Wilmington, but Wilmington, Delaware, and lived a very secular life. Never went to church. Never thought about God or anything like that. And really, where I grew up and in the life that I lived, no one else was talking about it either, so it really wasn't even on the radar. And so I'm going to school and I'm doing, you know, that kind of treadmill thing, trying to, you know, get to success. So I go through high school and college, and I'm getting good grades, and I'm getting A's, and I'm end up in medical school, graduate number 1 in my class, and and I go to internship and fellowship at Duke and become, what I've always wanted to be. And it took, 36 years to get there. So it was a lot of hard work, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And again, it really pretty much in terms of God or faith, it just wasn't on the radar. I had a few little incidents which are in the book, but it was not something I was thinking about. The paradigm of life that I was taught was that, evolution is true. We've evolved over billions of years. And when you die, you're just kind of recycled matter, and that's it. So by the time I was 36 and I had achieved my goals, or what I call the American dream, it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. So the success, the money, the stature, the achievement, the material things, the trips, the cars, the whatever it is, all that stuff, the house, when you finally get everything that you want and there's nothing else on that list, and you finally arrive, which is where I was still empty. And I was very frustrated. I was depressed. I was not a very nice person a lot of the time. I was drinking too much because that gave me a little peace. And it was a frustration because what do you tell someone when you have so much success as to why you were not happy, why you're not feeling fulfilled, why is the new car or the big house not doing it for you? There wasn't a sense of contentment. And so the whole faith thing happened in God's providence by, we basically moved into the big neighborhood at this point in Cary. We're in Cary, North Carolina, and there were a bunch of Christians on the street, and they basically kind of snubbed us because we were the heathens. And we were a little heathen, I'll give you that. But it got so bad that I told my wife, I'm going to the Christian bookstore, I'm going to buy a Bible, and I'm going to prove that these people are hypocrites. And I wasn't out to necessarily set out to prove that it was what they were believing wasn't true, but I just wanted to prove them from their own instruction manual, so to speak, that they weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing.
The thing that hits me with that, Greg, not to interrupt you, is like that. It's a lot of fire to get to that point. Like to get to the point where you're ready to go and basically disprove. You know what I mean? Like
yeah. Well, it was bad. I mean, they told their kids that they couldn't play with our kids, and these are 3 and 4 year olds. I'm like, this is ridiculous. So I put on the disguise and go on the Christian bookstore because I didn't want to be seen in the Christian bookstore. I just wasn't that kind of guy. And hat, sunglasses, the whole bit. And I basically sat down and started reading the Bible for this purpose. But what got my attention was the claims that this person Jesus was making, that he's God on earth in the flesh, and that he's there to rescue me. And it was interesting because a lot of the things that I had struggled with, he had the answers for. Now look, I was not religious. I didn't believe it, but I struggled with death. Like, my kids that I'm tucking in bed, are they really just recycled matter? The memories that were forming, they really just vanish when someone dies? And I used to struggle with, why do we die at all? I was in medicine, but if we're so highly evolved, why is there so much disease and cancer and pain and suffering? And what happens when you die? And so, he was saying that I've come to conquer death, and death is in the world because of sin. And you're empty, you're not fulfilled in your life because you were meant for me. You were meant for God, not to live your own life independently. So he was giving me answers. I just had to figure out, could I believe that it was true? And there was a struggle in terms of honesty. There was a strong part of me. I did not want to be a Christian because of the people that I knew that were Christians, oddly, funny enough. And as a scientist, I had trouble believing in the miraculous. I just was taught that it doesn't happen. But when I looked at the evidence, and it all basically boiled down to the resurrection, when I looked at the actual evidence, I'm talking, give me facts, give me things that I can hang my hat on, in the Bible, out of the Bible, the evidence was overwhelming. And there really wasn't any other explanation. And I found that even the critics had to admit that. They just chose not to believe it. So long and short, through a process, I basically became a Christian and didn't know it. And the premise of the book is I was so radically changed. Like I woke up a different person. Not perfect, don't get me wrong. But God did something to me that changed me instantaneously. So when I wake up the next day as a doctor, I'm trying to figure out, okay, what in the world has happened to me? And I didn't connect it with the studying the Bible and all that kind of stuff, because, you know, if you're raised like I was, that God's so distant, when no one's talking to him, no one is even mentioning him, at most Christianity would be a ticket to heaven where when you die, you get to go, which would still be a good deal. But in terms of God interacting with me or working with my person or hearing what I'm saying, that just, I couldn't comprehend that. And once I figured out that that was what happened, that's when I was freaked out. And I'm like, and I had to get honest about everything. I had to be honest that everything I was taught about who I am, why I'm here, what I'm supposed to be doing, how I'm supposed to conduct my life, they were all wrong. All of them. Every single thing was wrong, and that's hard to swallow.
Yeah. What kind of process? I mean, how long are you talking about here? You know, because I think sometimes you hear of this kind of conversion thing, or you talk about it, and it seems unattainable. But there's a story in your book, like there were high school students that you called the ski trip kooks. You know what I mean? When you were on a high school ski trip, and it was, you know, they started talking about faith, and you got angry, kicked the chair over, or whatever. Right. So what I want to see here is that this pursuit of you wasn't just a one overnight thing, right?
No.
It was going on for many years.
It was going on for years.
Yeah, and so what do you think actually brought you to the point where at 18 in high school you weren't ready to go there, but at 36, and you know, what do you think was a catalyst for you to get honest?
Well, when you're 18, you know, you're kind of above the law. You think that you're invincible, and you're not thinking about bigger picture things. But when you're 36 and you have a family and you've got kids, and you know, you have friends dying. We had a friend down the street die in their 30s. You're humbled a little bit more by life. And as a doctor, I had practiced long enough to see bad things happen. That invincibility is gone, and then of course you throw that in with, hey, there's something wrong with my life. I've got all this success. I've got everything I've ever wanted, and I'm not content. I'm not happy. It makes you more open to.
Yeah. So how did faith? You know, it's interesting to me as I think about your story. It's almost like intellect, which is crazy. It's almost like intellect led you to Christ. You know, because you went through I want the facts. I want the truth. You know what I mean? It's like intellect led you there, but then faith has kind of catapulted you since. You know, so. What kind of experience did you have once you had that kind of transformation? Like what kind of transpired?
Well, I mean, a few things ran through my mind. The most profound thing that I realized, which kind of changed my whole paradigm of life, was that, think about it, God heard what I said the night that I asked him to change my life and accept Jesus and all this. So think about, how did he hear me? There's, 6 billion people on the planet? And how did he know that I meant what I said, right? How did he know that I wasn't just reciting words or something? That's really profound, guys. That means that he knows everything. And he knows, he's been there the whole time, and he's just like knowing every bit of who I am, even by the intentions of what I'm saying. So at that point, that's when the faith engaged, where I'm like, I'm going to start talking to him about everything and trying to figure out, you know, because he's obviously personally interested in me. That's what blew my mind, was that Christianity wasn't a church attendance thing and listening to a man speak and dressing up and going to all the things. No. This is like God wanting to run and interact with me and my life and change the things that are wrong with it at a personal level. And so when I realized that he was that able to know what I'm talking and saying, that's when I'm like, okay, Lord, you know, let's just have it all out on the table. And that's what's amazed me, is that God is so personal and interested in the details of my life.
Once you had this kind of transformation, like how did it begin to affect and infuse your day-to-day actions? Because I think a lot of the Western church is this mindset of like, all right, well, once that happens, you can't stay a skin doctor. I mean, you know, you can't be a surgeon. You gotta. I mean, come on, man. What do you got? So walk us through kind of what happened in that.
So there, you know, nothing's overnight, but you what goes through your mind as well. okay, I'm a believer now, but if I go all in, then he's gonna make me do something I don't want to do, quit my business. I mean, like you're saying, everyone thinks they're gonna be called to be a missionary or something, and that's really not the case. But I did struggle with that because I was worried if I really said, okay, whatever you say, Lord, whatever you want goes, what will he do? Mm-hmm. But I had enough people assure me that I would be missing out on the very reason I was made, that on the whole plan. And that was cool to me, that potentially God had a specific plan for my life. And that's the only way that I'll be fulfilled. That's the only way I'll get rid of that void, that chasing materialism and all that stuff that I was doing. So once I made that leap of faith, so to speak, and saying, trusting that what he's going to do, he didn't do any of that. In fact, he used me and began to change me right where I was. So I'm still a doctor. He moved me to Wilmington from Cary. I mean, the Lord told me, you are going to Wilmington. You are to quit your job in Cary and come. That was like 6 years later, but that's one thing that he did. And so now it's just integrated into my life as a doctor. We don't force it on anyone, of course, but people are hurting. People are struggling out there. And they know that we're Christians because my book's on display. And so people will ask, hey, what about the book? And we put Bibles in our rooms. All of our patient rooms have Bibles. We never say a word. We just set them there. And people take them. Or they'll ask, hey, what's up with the Bibles? And you guys are those Bible thumper people or something? And we're like, no, we're Christians, and that's a $40 Bible. A lot of people can't afford it. We give them out for free. If you want one, fine. If you don't, no big deal. And it's amazing how, God will use that.
Yeah. How so in your day-to-day practice, I mean, you're still, from what I gather, one of the most prominent, successful skin surgeons, not only in Wilmington, but, well recognized. You travel, speak at conferences. I mean, God has continued to bless you in your professional life, even in the midst of, holding to that kind of conviction. And I think we live in a world that says the two can't integrate, right? It's like, this is Greg Viehman, the doctor. Today you're Greg Viehman, the Christian, because you get to come and share your faith. But you're going to have to go back out that door and become Greg Viehman, the doctor. You know what I mean? Like, how has those two become integrated in your heart, and kind of giving you peace through the tension that exists?
Well, he really hasn't changed anything in terms of, monetarily. I guess some people think that he's going to have you sell everything and all that. In fact, we have more so-called financial blessing than we did before we started. So God he's not concerned about how much money I make. He's concerned about, am I doing what he wants me to be doing, and am I fulfilling, his purposes for me, which are small in the part of daily life. I mean, what he wants me to do is minor, and the rest of the time is free or playtime, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So he uses us, partly financially in the business to support ministries. Mm-hmm. We go out and speak. At the end of the day, he's about reaching people. At the end of the day, that's what it's about. Everyone in this room is going to die, and you're either going to be with the Lord or you're not. And so that's his main objective. And we've seen time and time again how people come through our office with a cancer, and that's not really why they're there. We had an old crusty man come in, and he was really belligerent, and he was angry that we had this book and this Bible on display. Why do you have those things? And you people should be pushing this down my throat, and I don't want to believe this. And we said, well, we haven't said a word to you, sir. Dr. Viehman wrote the book, and the Bibles are free, but we didn't tell you what to believe. But he left with a book and a Bible, okay? His pastor comes back a month later with his wife, and they said, this guy is a different man. He's scaring his wife because she doesn't know who he is. He was radically saved by God.
Wow.
And we didn't do anything. We did absolutely nothing in our office, didn't say a word to the man. All we did was make our faith available to him.
That's a good word right there. Making your faith available. So when you kind of look at your life now, like your ministry, Everlasting Strength, has kind of birthed out of your passion, for the Lord, and it includes, I would assume, what you're doing within your workspace. But you're also traveling on the weekends. You're speaking, and you did something at Easter. Pretty sure I saw it at Easter. Like you went through the physicality, like as a doctor, like what Jesus actually went through.
We have a teaching on the medical aspects of the crucifixion. It's actually been written up in many medical journals. Many doctors have written on what actually happens to the body, to the person in crucifixion from a medical standpoint. Because the nail goes through these nerves, which are very painful, and there's issues with breathing, and you actually die of suffocation, and the pain and all that. So it can add to your perspective on what actually happened.
Well, we speak
on that.
Well, to me, and not a doctor, I don't know any of that stuff, right? So it's like, you see that from your perspective with your intellect and knowledge or whatever. It brought a profound kind of realness to it, that was really powerful. So when you're kind of navigating this now, what observations do you make within the construct of kind of the world we live in, the world we operate in? How much resistance do you get from staff? How much, what kind of feedback? Like, where do you find yourself in navigating this integrated faith into everyday life?
I think that a lot of it is inside and personal. So I pray for every patient that comes through the place, not with them, but on my list. I get a list of the patients, so I do that. I pray for the staff, and I pray for what we're going to do, because God is interested in that. And then in terms of the integration, I've pretty much learned to, again, make myself available and not hide it, not be a secret agent Christian where no one knows what you are. So you make yourself known that this is what you're about and this is what you believe, and then in the office, in the integration, I wait for God to give us an opportunity. You can't force an opportunity, you can't make it happen, but if you wait and you're available and you're thinking and praying to be used, then God will use you. But you need to wait on Him to do it, because you can't just go up to your coworker and tell them they need to believe in Jesus or something. It's not going to work like that. So I think that you integrate, you pray, you be open, you be looking, because it's amazing how God is in control of minor circumstances. I mean, I flew on a plane one time, and a guy sat next to me. And so I'm reading my Bible, and he's like, 10 minutes into this, he's like, "Why are you reading the Bible?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "What are you reading that for?" He says, "People don't read the Bible." And I said, "Well, I'm a believer, blah, blah, blah." And then we went into this long discussion, and basically this guy, his wife was a Christian, and his whole family was, and he was fighting it, and he was angry about it. He says, "I don't want to go to church, I don't want to wake up on Sunday, I don't want to dress up, and I don't want to listen to the man speak." I said, "Then fine, don't go, because it's not about any of that." But I said, "This is what you do. You go home and you ask God if you're real and this is true to show you. Just do that." I said, "Forget about church." I said, "Because if you become a believer, you're going to want to go anyway, and you'll find a church that you like and you want to go. So forget about church, because it's not about that." 2 months later, the guy emails me. He became a believer through various circumstances. But here's the thing. As he got to the gate to check in, his ticket got messed up. And he wasn't in the right seat. He was supposed to be sitting in the front. He had to get moved all of the way back and sit next to me. Now you tell me, is that a coincidence? It is not. And if you've been a believer long enough, you'll realize that God is working even at that level. And so that if you live your life with those antennas up, and you're available, and you're praying for God to help you, and it could even be helping another believer. It doesn't have to be just for people who don't understand. He will do it.
Yeah.
But you wait.
Yeah.
But then when it is time, you have to have the courage to do it.
Yeah.
Because you'll know it will be hard on you. Say something to that person. And I've chickened out just as many times as I've done the right thing and said something, and then I'm like, darn, I blew it, and I knew it. But God doesn't condemn you for it. He'll just use someone else to help that person.
Yeah.
But that's when the courage comes in, that when you know you're supposed to intervene and he's given you the door, you've got to go through it.
Yeah.
It's like Esther, where she was in the right place at the right time, and he said, it was for a time such as this. But she had to act.
Yeah. It's man, there's so many thoughts I'm wrestling with right now. One of the things that you and I talked about, we were grabbing coffee, is the story of Jacob in the Old Testament. And I just told you my own life how Jacob was a guy who wrestled with everything but God. He wrestled for his father's blessing. He wrestled with his twin brother. He wrestled for his wife. He wrestled for his father-in-law's blessing. He was a kind of a schemer, but until he wrestled with God, he didn't know who he was. And it was that honesty to wrestle with kind of the right things. And so for you, I see this, this thing about getting to the point where you're really willing to wrestle with that and submit to it. But then God, elevates it. And like you said a second ago, you can either give him credit for moving that guy into the seat beside you, or you can take credit, by saying it was circumstance or whatever. So as a guy who, feels this call now to kind of go out and evangelize, you don't only evangelize with words like you said, but you evangelize by who you are. Talk a little bit about that for, folks who might be saying like, gosh, I don't know the right words to say or whatnot, and they put a lot of pressure on the spoken side of it, rather than just kind of coming from their gifts, as a way to express him in the world.
Yeah, well, people won't listen to you unless they think you care, first of all. So, if you're not joyful, if you're miserable, and you're, difficult to deal with and not fun to be around, no one's going to listen to you anyway. So, but if you're living it, then that takes care of itself. So if you're in the right relationship with God and with the Lord, and you're doing the things you need to do to foster that and grow that, everything else takes care of itself in terms of how you're acting with other people. The scripture says, without love, you're nothing. It's a resounding gong. So you've got to have that first, but that's a concern for other people that is willing to sacrifice something of your life to help them. Mm-hmm. So when people see that you're willing to help or sacrifice for them, that goes a long way, because people don't normally want to do that.
Sure, that's kind of like anti-cultural, like take care of self first, right? And this the other not others focused. Greg, what kind of resistance do you deal with from neighbors, friends, associates? Do you feel like it's inhibited you in any way? Like when you look back to your former way of life, right? And then you had that desire just to get honest. Like, is there an out that ever questions, that ever kind of, man, it would just be easier if I could go back?
No, I definitely want to go back. There is resistance, but you reach a point where you have the heart of God in you for the people that you're talking to, and it isn't you, and so you don't care if they dismiss you or give you resistance, because you're just wanting to do or say whatever you can to help them. And when they resist, you have to say, hey, okay. I have family members, lots of people that I've talked to, and they know what I'm about, but they're not having it. Mm-hmm. So, all I can do is tell them. Then, like you say, continue to live it before them, and then you hope that they will, give me an opportunity at some point later because we have a lot of family like that.
Yeah. All right. So when you look at like your walk now, like your every day, you're rising and you're reading the Word and you're praying, like, how important is it for you to have people to come alongside you in that journey?
That's critical. Someone did that for me. It's kind of like, if you become a believer, whenever that was, you're a spiritual baby. And Paul talks about that in Corinthians, that they were still babies despite they shouldn't have been. And so if you think about it, what does a baby need to do? He needs people to help feed him, and then he has to eat in order to grow, right? And as he grows, that baby will grow up and get stronger. And think about it, does a baby know that he's a baby? He doesn't, does he really? He doesn't really know, but Does he know that he has a father? Yeah, kind of, right? There's this fuzzy person that may, do that. But as he grows up and matures, he can feed himself more. He can grow more, and then he really knows he has parents. And then that relationship can grow even more as he matures. So what's true physically for us is also true spiritually, is that you have to grow. And you grow by, main way is by reading and studying the scripture and talking to God. But you need resources, you need people to help you do that. There is a part of that that's on your own, but think about it, a child isn't often on his own to what is in their 20s now. There's still that support. And so that's the same thing with true spiritually, is that there's really a period where people come alongside and help you to grow, answer your questions, talk about your frustrations, give you resources to help you in that growth. Because everything is the growth. If you don't grow, you'll be miserable. Or you'll be starving. There's a lot of spiritually starving believers out there. Yes, they're Christians. Yes, they will go to heaven. But they are spiritually starving, and so they don't have what God wants them to have. And so, organizations like yourself that have those resources to help people can change someone's life. Yeah. I mean, it can change everything. I mean, my wife's sitting there, and when we speak, she talks about how terrible I was, because I was. But now our marriage is great, and everything is transformed in that, even through faith.
Yeah, man, it's just so encouraging to see, because I think we live in a culture where our distrust of religion is real, and we start to see the fallacy in the institution, or people who, like you said, wouldn't let you play with their kids, you know what I mean? I would imagine now as a Christian, you're probably going to let your kids play with whomever, right? When you get real about it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's imperfections even in that kind of, line of thinking. And as a culture, we kind of grow a little bit distasteful of the institution of it at all. What I love about what you do is say, it's not in a church. You know what I mean? You're a physician, you know what I mean? A doctor who is eradicating cancer from people's bodies, as you said. But there's also, too, in doing so, you get to be a witness to attack spiritual cancer. Like, for me, man, that's just the coolest part. It's like, wow, like you're being used outside of a pulpit, outside of a church, outside of that traditional context to be able to reach people. And that gives me hope that, people in every walk of life, in every industry or whatever, we need Christian people to live that faith out as a way to draw folks into that kind of community. Do you see kind of a shift in culture in that regard? Do you kind of feel like there's any kind of movement in that way? I mean, what's your thoughts towards that?
Well, don't look at the institutions, or you'll be let down. Because, if you read, even in the Bible, Revelation chapters 2 through 3, most of the churches were a mess. So you can't look at the institution, you can't look at people who are Christians, because we're all a mess. So you make it about your relationship with God. Yes, church has its place, but America has made it largely churchianity. And that's not good to a large extent, because maybe half or 2/3 of the people in there may not even be believers, and depending on what church you're at. And so you look and see the hypocrisy, and it can drive you away from God, even as a Christian. I had a lady the other day tell me that, and this woman's a believer, that her non-believing friends are treating her better than her supposedly believing friends. So you gotta make it about you and the Lord, and not focus certainly on the institution. Because, there's just a lot of problems out there, and that will drive you away.
Yeah. The last question I want to ask you is, what did going to Jerusalem? I know when I was in your office, I remember seeing the pictures of you actually going to the place where these events, occurred. What was that like?
That's kind of surreal. I mean, when you're there and you just think about what happened, and just the whole concept of God walking on earth, and that He came for us is mind blowing. And there's something. So now the cool thing is that if you've done that, if you ever get to go to Israel, you should go, because then when you read the Bible, you see it in your head, like you were there. Mm-hmm. You've been on the Sea of Galilee. You've been at the Temple Mount. You've been, to these places.
Yeah, that's super cool. Well, man, I'm just grateful for your willingness to share and I love the testimony that you live out, and having the opportunity, the forum to share your testimony is so encouraging. I wanted to open up, to anybody here that might have a question for Greg before we kind of wrap up our time. Anybody have anything that they wanted to ask, or any thoughts, or so forth?
I think it's a great way to put it when you say, you gotta kind of have your antenna up in the morning. What's that prayer look like for you in the morning? Is that's a daily morning as you go in, of putting your antenna up for not only the patients you'll see, but your staff, and maybe talk a little bit more about what that looks like for you.
I'll just say, Lord, use me today in some way to touch someone's life or help someone, and enable me to recognize it and enable me to do what you would have me to do. I don't think it has to be long. And then just that simple prayer, though, seems to trigger that awareness versus rushing out of the house, getting to work, frazzled, and that never being thought. So it does require you to get up a little bit earlier. And morning's not the best for everyone, I understand that. But for me it is, because I like to start my day that way. And so that does seem to trigger something where you're more aware. Just recognizing that, okay, I'm living a day. God is giving me my breath. He's making my heart beat. He has a plan. Whatever that plan is, I want to follow it. There's some cool scriptures that the Lord fashioned the days for me when as yet there were none of them in Psalm 139. And Ephesians 2:9 says that he has these good works planned for us, that we should walk in them. I want to know what those are. I want to fulfill that, because when you start living like that, each day is exciting because you don't know what God's going to do or what he's got planned for you. And maybe not every day something happens, but a lot of days it will, and then it's fun because you get to see him working, and it makes the Christian life exciting. It makes it, it's personal, it's interactive with other people, it's real. It's not just this Sunday thing. It's, actually what's going on, because that's what he's really up to. You just have to learn to recognize it and learn to live it.
Chris, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask about what sorts of things do you see, now that you've been in Wilmington for some time now, what sorts of things do you see going on in this community that excites you, and do you have any thoughts about, in the short term, what are some of the goals that you have for your, personally, spiritually, for some of the things that you want to be involved in this community in the near term and medium term?
I think this event right here is very exciting and encouraging to me. I mean, here's a new company that's growing quickly, and they are open to making this a voluntary thing, and you've got 40 or 50 people here that want to know more about faith and God and how they can impact the community. And then you've got guys like yourselves who are on fire to help those people in that venue. That's really encouraging. I mean, even the other day when we met and talked about this, I left there really encouraged, because that means that, like you said, God is doing something.
Yeah.
And it's big, and you can be a part of that. And that's an exciting way to live, to think that you are a part of something that God is doing. So even by you being here, you're a part of it, and he is equipping you or training you, or going to speak to you how you can be used in here and outside of here. So that's exciting, because you get in your own little world. I didn't even know Live Oak was here. I knew that you existed because I've had a few patients, but to come on campus and see it and see this whole thing, that's cool. Because that's not everywhere. Not in today's world.
No, not at all. Does anybody else have any questions?
And I can stick around afterwards if you want to ask something that you don't want to ask publicly. Make sure you get the handout up there if you didn't get one. They're up there.
Yeah. Well, guys, Greg, man, thank you so much just for being willing to share, and it's an encouragement, just to see you living it out, man. So thank you for that. Guys, like I said, the purpose of this is just to open up a conversation and just to see, this is actually what's going on in the world. This is right here in Wilmington. This is somebody in our own city who is choosing to live this way and has seen faith enhance and bring that more to life aspect that you felt. I know in my own journey of redefining rich when I was writing my book, I mean, it was so encouraging. Certainly as we with YouPrint have been doing this, to know that there's a brother in town, that stands in the gap, that's encouraging. And so we want to just challenge you guys. We're here. Part of what we do at YouPrint is come alongside people. Like, we want to help people, right? And so we have this mentoring program. We have these resources. We've got a great 21-day spiritual cleanse. We've been talking about having a regular meeting coming in January. And at the last event, at the last one of these, I told you guys we have a vision to build a life center in Wilmington, a physical church between Sundays, not a church that the unchurched is kind of the vision for this, where people can feed and be fed, teach and be taught, where people can learn financial literacy, where Greg can come in and give some stuff about, his experience, where you guys can come in and talk about what you're seeing. Just a vibrant campus where the work of God can come together and be done to help this community. That's our vision, and we can't do it alone. And we speak it out because we want God to come along and be a part of it, and you guys are a part of that. So thank you for being here. As always, if you have any questions, we'll be available. But we appreciate you guys, and y'all have a fantastic day.